Hey everyone, my name is Marcus, and I'm a park ranger working in one of America's most remote national parks in Montana. What I'm about to share with you today, it happened 3 months ago, and I still can't sleep properly at night. Before I begin, I can see that around 80% of viewers watching my videos haven't subscribed yet. So, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss any of my horror stories. Also, please comment below and tell me which country you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love hearing from all of you around the world. And if you have your own horror stories to share, please comment them below or email them to me. I read every single one, and who knows, your story might be featured in a future video. Now, let me tell you what happened that night in Glacier National Park. It was mid-October. The tourist season was winding down, and most of the hiking trails were getting ready to close for winter. I'd been working as a ranger for 8 years, thought I'd seen everything these mountains had to offer. Bears, mountain lions, lost hikers, medical emergencies, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered that week. I was stationed at the Going to the Sun Road Ranger Station, working the night shift. My partner Jake had called in sick, so I was flying solo that evening. The weather forecast predicted a heavy snowstorm, so I was expecting a quiet night. Just me, the radio, and endless paperwork. Around 9 p.m., I received a call on the emergency line. The voice on the other end was shaky, panicked, barely coherent. "Please, you have to help us. We're lost, and something is following us." I immediately switched into professional mode. "Sir, this is Ranger Marcus at Glacier National Park. Can you tell me your exact location?" We took the Hidden Lake Overlook Trail, but we got turned around, and now, oh God, it's getting closer." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. I grabbed my emergency pack, flashlight, radio, and headed out into the wilderness. The temperature was dropping fast, and light snow was already beginning to fall. I knew that trail like the back of my hand. It was supposed to be an easy 3-mile round trip, but in these conditions, with darkness setting in, even experienced hikers could get disoriented. As I made my way up the trail, I kept calling out, hoping to hear a response. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, creating dancing shadows among the pine trees. The only sound were my boots crunching on the frozen ground, and the wind whistling through the branches above. After about an hour of searching, I finally heard something, voices, faint but definitely human. I followed the sound off the main trail, deeper into the wilderness than most tourists would ever venture. "Hello, Park Ranger, can you hear me?" I shouted. "Over here, please hurry," came the reply. I found them huddled behind a large boulder, a couple in their late 20s, Tessa and Damon from Texas. They were both shivering, clearly hypothermic, and Tessa was crying uncontrollably. "Thank God you found us," Damon said, his teeth chattering. "We've been lost for hours, and something has been stalking us." I immediately began my standard rescue protocol, checking them for injuries, wrapping them in emergency blankets, radioing for backup. But as I worked, I noticed something odd. They kept looking over their shoulders, scanning the tree line with wild, terrified eyes. "What exactly did you see out there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. Tessa looked at me with haunted eyes. It wasn't human, but it walked like one. Tall, maybe 7 feet, with long arms that reached almost to the ground. Its eyes, they glowed in the dark, like a cat's, but bigger, much bigger. I'd heard stories like this before, usually from exhausted, hypothermic hikers whose minds were playing tricks on them. Mountain lions could look much larger in the dark, and fear had a way of distorting perception. "Let's get you both back to safety," I said. "We can talk more once you're warm and hydrated." But as we began making our way back to the main trail, I started to feel like we were being watched. There was something moving parallel to us through the trees, keeping pace, staying just outside the range of my flashlight. I could hear branches breaking, footsteps that seemed too heavy, too deliberate to be an animal. Damon grabbed my arm. "You hear that? It's back." I stopped, listening carefully. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. In my 8 years as a ranger, I'd never experienced such complete stillness in these mountains. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever encountered. It was intelligent, somehow deliberate. My training kicked in. I reached for the bear spray on my belt, but what happened next made my blood run cold. Whatever was out there, it started mimicking us. "Hello, Park Ranger, can you hear me?" Came a voice from the darkness, but it was my voice, exactly as I had called out earlier. Tessa screamed, and Damon pulled her closer to him. I felt my hand shake as I raised my flashlight, sweeping it across the tree line. "Over here, please hurry." Now it was using Damon's voice, the exact words he had spoken when I found them. I knew we had to keep moving. Whatever this thing was, standing still would only make us easier targets. I urged Tessa and Damon forward, but with each step, the mimicking grew more sophisticated, more unsettling. It began repeating our conversation, playing back our words like some kind of twisted recording device. But then it started combining phrases, creating new sentences using our voices. "Thank God it's back," came Tessa's voice from behind us. "Something over here, stalking us." In Damon's terrified tone, "Can you hear that 7 feet?" Mixing all our voices together. I'd never experienced anything like this in my entire career. My rational mind tried to find explanations. Maybe it was an echo effect, some kind of acoustic phenomenon unique to this part of the mountain. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. We were still about 2 miles from the ranger station when my radio crackled to life. It was Jake, my partner who had called in sick. "Marcus, come in, Marcus, are you out there?" I grabbed the radio immediately. "Jake, thank God. I've got 2 hikers. We need immediate backup. Something's following us." "Marcus, I'm at the station, but I can see you on the security monitors. You're alone. There's no one with you." I looked at Tessa and Damon, who were staring at me with confusion. They could obviously hear Jake through the radio. "Jake, I've got 2 people with me. Tessa and Damon from Texas. They've been lost for hours." "Marcus, buddy, you need to get back here now. You're talking to yourself. You've been talking to yourself for over an hour?" The world seemed to spin around me. I looked at my companions. They were right there, solid real. I could see their breath in the cold air. Could feel Tessa shivering against my arm. "We're real," Tessa whispered. "Tell him we're real." But Jake's voice continued through the radio. "Marcus, there's been no emergency calls tonight, no missing hikers, and the Hidden Lake Overlook Trail has been closed for maintenance for 3 weeks. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see my own footprints in the snow, but there were no other tracks. Just mine, leading from the station to where I was standing and back again in loops and circles. I was alone. I had been alone the entire time. Tessa and Damon were staring at me now with expressions I couldn't quite read. Their eyes seemed darker somehow, their faces less defined in the shadows. "Marcus," Tessa's voice had changed, become hollow echoing. "You found us. You saved us. Don't you remember? We've been waiting for you." Damon added, his voice distorting, stretching like an old tape, recording playing too slow. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over fallen log. My radio crackled again. "Marcus, get out of there now, whatever you're seeing. It's not real. Follow my voice back to the station." But as I tried to move toward Jake's voice, Tessa and Damon began to change. Their faces stretched, becoming longer, more angular. Their eyes grew larger, reflecting my flashlight beam like mirrors. Their limbs extended, arms reaching down past their knees, just like Tessa had described earlier. "Don't leave us, Marcus," they said in unison, their voices layering over each other, creating an impossible harmony. "We need you. We've always needed you." I ran. I dropped my pack, kept only my flashlight and radio, and ran as fast as I could through the snow-covered forest. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running, but gliding somehow, their voices calling out in perfect imitations of people I knew. My mother's voice. Marcus, come home, honey. My ex-wife, Sarah. Marcus, I still love you. My deceased father. Son, I'm proud of you. Every voice from my past, every person who had ever meant something to me, calling out from the darkness behind me. I must have run for 20 minutes before I finally saw the lights of the ranger station ahead. Jake was standing on the porch, waving a flashlight, calling my name. I collapsed at his feet, gasping, trying to explain what I'd experienced. But as I looked back toward the forest, there was nothing there. No sounds, no glowing eyes, no impossible voices. Jake helped me inside, made me coffee, and listened as I told him everything. He didn't laugh, didn't tell me I was losing my mind. Just listen with the patience of someone who'd spent decades in these mountains. There are things up here, he said quietly. Things that don't belong in any textbook or training manual. I've been working these parks for 30 years, and I've learned not to question what I can't explain. He showed me the security footage from that night. There I was, walking alone on the trail, talking to empty air, gesturing to invisible companions, having full conversations with nothing. But here's the thing that still haunts me. In the final few minutes of the footage, just before I came running back to the station, you can see shadows moving behind me. Not animal shadows, not tree shadows moved by wind, but tall, elongated shapes that seem to flow rather than walk. Jake enhanced the footage, zoomed in, adjusted the contrast. What we saw made us both go silent. The shadows had faces, human faces, but wrong somehow. Features that shifted and morphed, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, mouths that stretched too wide when they spoke. They're mimics. Jake said finally. Native legends talk about them. Spirits that copy human behavior, that learn from watching us, that can become perfect imitations of anyone they've observed long enough. But why me? I asked. Why that night? Jake poured himself another coffee, his hand shaking slightly. Maybe you weren't the first. Maybe they've been watching hikers on that trail for years, decades, learning, copying, waiting for the right opportunity. He pulled out a file folder, thick with reports dating back to the 1970s. Missing hikers, all last seen on trails that had been mysteriously closed for maintenance. Search and rescue operations that found no trace, no tracks, nothing. What if, he said slowly, what if they don't just copy voices? What if they can copy entire people? What if every missing hiker, every person who vanished without a trace, is still out there somewhere, being used as a template? I spent the next week on administrative leave, seeing a counselor, trying to process what had happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about those files, about all the people who had disappeared over the years. When I finally returned to work, I started doing my own research. I reached out to rangers at other national parks, compared notes, shared stories. What I found was terrifying. Similar incidents were happening everywhere. Yosemite, Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, Zion. Rangers across the country were reporting encounters with mimics, with things that could perfectly imitate human speech and behavior. But there was a pattern. It was always happening on trails that had been closed, always involving hikers who had strayed from marked paths, always in areas where cell phone coverage was spotty or non-existent. Ranger Jennifer from Yosemite told me about finding a family of 4, parents and 2 children, sitting around their campfire at 2 a.m. They seemed normal, friendly even, invited her to join them for Esmores. It wasn't until she radioed in their campsite number that she learned the truth. That exact family had disappeared from that same spot 15 years earlier. Ranger David from Yellowstone described discovering what appeared to be a group of college students, hiking in winter gear that looked decades out of date. They spoke in slang from the 1980s, carried equipment that hadn't been manufactured since the Clinton administration, but they insisted they had just started their hike that morning. The stories were all similar, all impossible to explain using conventional logic, but the evidence was mounting. Something was collecting people in our national parks, studying them, learning to become them. I started carrying a digital recorder on every shift, documenting everything I saw and heard. I became obsessed with understanding what these things were, where they came from, what they wanted. 3 weeks after my encounter, I got my answer. I was patrolling the Avalanche Lake Trail, a different section of the park, when I encountered a lone hiker. She was young, maybe early 20s, wearing expensive gear that looked brand new. "Excuse me," she called out as I approached. "I think I might be lost. Could you help me find the Hidden Lake Overlook trail?" My blood went cold. That trail was still closed. Had been closed for over a month now. "Miss," I said carefully, "that trail has been closed for maintenance. When did you start your hike?" She smiled, but there was something wrong with the expression. Too wide. Held too long. "Oh, I started this morning. My friends Tessa and Damon are waiting for me there." I reached for my radio, but she continued talking, and her voice began to change, becoming deeper, more masculine. "We took the Hidden Lake Overlook trail, but we got turned around, and now, oh God, it's getting closer." It was Damon's voice, the exact words from the emergency call that started everything. But coming from this young woman's mouth, it was beyond unsettling. "Please," she continued, now switching to Tessa's voice. "You have to help us. We're lost, and something is following us." I backed away slowly, my hand moving to the bear spray on my belt, but she just stood there, smiling that impossible smile, cycling through voices like a broken radio scanner. My own voice. "Sir, this is Ranger Marcus at Glacier National Park." Jake's voice. "Marcus, come on, Marcus, are you out there?" My mother's voice. "Marcus, come home, honey." She, whatever this thing was, had been listening to my radio communications, learning, copying, building a library of human speech patterns. But now it was making mistakes, combining voices inappropriately, revealing its true nature. "What are you?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Her face began to shift, features rearranging themselves like clay being molded by invisible hands. The smile widened until it split her face from ear to ear, revealing rows of teeth that were too sharp, too numerous for any human mouth. "We are what remains," she said in a voice that was every voice at once, chorus of stolen words and borrowed identities. "We are the lost, the forgotten, the ones who wandered too far from the safe paths. We collect, we preserve, we become, so that no one is ever truly gone." Her body began to stretch upward, growing taller, thinner, arms extending until her fingertips nearly touched the ground. Her eyes reflected my flashlight beam like mirrors, like the eyes of some nocturnal predator. "Join us, Marcus. Let's learn from you. Let's become you, so that you will never be forgotten." I ran again, but this time was different. This time I was ready. I'd been preparing for another encounter, studying the terrain, identifying escape routes, carrying extra equipment. As I ran, I could hear multiple voices behind me. All the people these things had copied over the years. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, calling out in perfect imitation of human speech. But I knew something they didn't. I'd been mapping the closed trails, identifying patterns in their behavior. They seemed drawn to specific locations, areas where people had gone missing, where tragic accidents had occurred, where strong emotions had been imprinted on the landscape itself. I led them toward Avalanche Creek, where the rushing water would mask their voices, where the rocky terrain would make it harder for them to follow. I'd prepared emergency supplies at strategic points, cached equipment that would help me survive if I needed to stay in the wilderness for extended periods. As I reached the creek, I heard them behind me, not just one voice now, but a whole congregation of stolen identities. They were getting bolder, more aggressive, like they sensed I was beginning to understand their true nature. I crossed the creek at a narrow point, then used my emergency flares to create a barrier of light behind me. The mimics stopped at the water's edge, seeming reluctant to cross, whether it was the running water, the bright light, or something else. I couldn't tell, but it gave me time to reach higher ground, to get to a position where I could observe them safely. Through my binoculars, I watched as they gathered on the opposite bank. There were dozens of them, all appearing human from a distance, all wearing clothing from different time periods. Some looked like hikers from 1970s, others like modern-day tourists. Still others wore uniforms that might have belonged to park rangers from decades past. They stood perfectly still, staring across the water at me, and I realized they were learning again, studying my escape route, my tactics, my equipment. Preparing for the next encounter, I radioed Jake, reported my location, requested immediate backup. But when the search and rescue team arrived, there was nothing there. No tracks, no evidence, just me standing alone on a mountainside, talking about impossible things. But I had proof this time. The digital recorder had captured everything, every stolen voice, every impossible conversation. Jake listened to the playback, his face growing paler with each passing minute. "We need to contact the FBI," he said quietly. "This is bigger than just our park, bigger than just missing hikers." "They won't believe us," I replied. Who would believe this? But Jake surprised me. He'd been keeping records too, documenting incidents, building a case file that stretched back decades. He showed me photographs, audio recordings, witness statements from rangers across the country. "There's a whole network of U.S." he explained. "Rangers who've encountered these things, who've seen what they can do. We've been sharing information, trying to understand the pattern, trying to protect people." He handed me a thick binder, filled with reports from Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. The mimics weren't isolated to our park. They were everywhere, in every major wilderness area in the western United States. They're spreading. Jake continued. "Each year, we document more incidents, more missing people, more impossible encounters. And they're getting better at what they do, more sophisticated, more convincing." We spent the next several hours reviewing case files, comparing timelines, looking for connections. What we found was a disturbing pattern of escalation. The earliest reports, from the 1960s and 70s, described simple voice mimicry, basic imitation of human speech. But the recent incidents showed a level of sophistication that was genuinely frightening. They were learning to replicate not just voices, but entire personalities, complete behavioral patterns, detailed memories that belonged to people who had disappeared years or even decades earlier. Ranger Sarah from Rocky Mountain National Park described encountering her own grandfather, a man who had died when she was 12 years old. He knew details about her childhood that only family members could know, spoke in his exact voice, even wore clothing that matched what he'd been buried in. Ranger Michael from Grand Canyon reported finding a group of tourists who claimed to be from the 1950s, complete with period-appropriate clothing, vintage camera equipment, and knowledge of historical events that ended exactly when they claimed to have started their hiking trip. The implications were staggering. These things weren't just copying recent victims. They had access to some kind of collective memory, a repository of human experiences spanning generations. What if they're not just copying people? I said, voicing the thought that had been bothering me for weeks. What if they're actually preserving them somehow? What if the people who disappear? What if they're still alive somewhere, being used as templates? Jake nodded grimly. That's what we're afraid of. Every missing person, every unexplained disappearance, they might all still be out there, trapped, being used to create these copies. He showed me a map of the western United States, marked with red pins indicating mimic encounters, and yellow pins indicating missing person reports. The correlation was undeniable. Every mimic sighting corresponded to an area with a high number of unexplained disappearances. There are patterns in the terrain, too, Jake explained, pointing to topographical features on the map. They seem to prefer areas with complex cave systems, underground water sources, places where large numbers of people could be hidden, could be kept alive for extended periods. The thought of hundreds, maybe thousands of people, trapped underground, being studied, copied, used to create an army of perfect mimics, it was too horrible to fully comprehend. We decided to take action. If the authorities wouldn't listen to individual reports, maybe they'd pay attention to coordinated evidence from multiple sources. Jake contacted the network of rangers he'd mentioned, and within a week, we had representatives from 12 different national parks ready to present a unified case. But before we could arrange the meeting, I had another encounter. I was working a day shift, routine trail maintenance on a loop trail near Lake McDonald, when I spotted someone sitting alone on a bench overlooking the water. It was a woman in her 60s, wearing a park ranger uniform that looked like it was from the 1980s. As I approached, she looked up and smiled. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Marcus?" I stopped dead in my tracks. She knew my name, but I'd never seen her before in my life. The uniform she wore had name tag that read Helen, but there was no Helen on our current staff roster. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Do we know each other?" Her smile widened, becoming that same impossible expression I'd seen before. "Oh, we know each other very well. I've been watching you work, watching you learn, watching you grow into such a fine ranger." She stood up slowly, and I noticed her movements were too fluid, too graceful for someone her apparent age. I was the first, the first ranger they copied, back in 1987. I went missing on the North Fork Trail. They found my equipment, but never found me. My radio crackled, Jake's voice coming through with unusual urgency. "Marcus, we just got a call from Helen's family. They're asking about visiting her memorial plaque. Want to know if we can arrange a ceremony. Apparently today is the 37th anniversary of her disappearance." The woman on the bench laughed, a sound like wind chimes mixed with breaking glass. 37 years I've been learning, watching, becoming better at being human than humans are themselves. She began to change as she spoke, her face shifting between different expressions, different ages, different identities entirely. For moments she looked like Tessa, then Damon, then the young woman from Avalanche Lake, then people I'd never seen before, dozens of faces, cycling through like a slideshow of stolen lives. "We started with just one," she continued in Helen's voice. "But now we are many, we are legion. We are everyone who ever walked alone in the wilderness, everyone who ever strayed from the marked paths, everyone who ever thought they could conquer the wild places of this world." I reached for my emergency beacon, the satellite communicator that would bring immediate help regardless of radio coverage. But she moved faster than should have been possible, crossing the distance between us in a single fluid motion, her hand closing over mine with inhuman strength. "You've been very helpful, Marcus," she said, her voice cycling through dozens of stolen identities. "You've shown us new behaviors, new responses, new ways to appear human. But now it's time for you to join us, to become part of the collection, to be preserved forever." I felt a strange drowsiness washing over me, like I was being drugged or hypnotized. My vision began to blur, my thoughts became sluggish, and I found myself wanting to simply sit down, to rest, to stop fighting, and let whatever was happening just happen. But then I heard something that snapped me back to alertness, my father's voice, coming from the creature's mouth, speaking words I remembered from childhood. "Son, I'm proud of you, you're stronger than you know. Don't give up, fight back." It was using my father's voice against me, trying to manipulate me with stolen memories of love and support. But hearing those precious words twisted and corrupted, it filled me with a rage I'd never experienced before. I broke free from her grip, using a defensive technique I'd learned in ranger training, and activated my emergency beacon. But instead of running, I stood my ground. "You want to learn about being human?" I shouted. "Then learn this. Humans don't give up. Humans fight back. Humans protect the people they love, even when it seems impossible." I pulled out my digital recorder, the one I'd been carrying for weeks, and played back every stolen voice I'd captured, every impossible conversation, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The creature stepped back, seeming genuinely surprised by my response. It had learned to mimic human fear, human submission, human desperation, but it hadn't learned to deal with human determination, human anger, human refusal to surrender. "You don't understand," it said, cycling through dozens of voices. "We preserve, we protect, we make sure no one is ever truly lost. We are salvation. We are immortality. You're parasites." I replied, my voice steady despite my terror. "You're thieves, stealing lives, stealing memories, stealing the essence of what makes us human. You're not preserving anything. You're destroying it." That's when I heard the helicopters. My emergency beacon had worked. Search and rescue was incoming. And this time I had evidence, recordings, proof of what was happening in our parks. The creature looked up at the approaching aircraft, then back at me. And for the first time I saw something like genuine emotion in its stolen features. Fear, anger, And something else, disappointment maybe. Like I had failed some kind of test. "This isn't over, Marcus," it said in Helen's voice. "We know you now. We've learned from you. And we will find you again. When you're alone, when you're vulnerable, when you least expect it." It began to fade, becoming translucent, like morning mist touched by sunlight. "We are patient. We are eternal. And you are still just human." And then it was gone, leaving only the scent of pine needles and the sound of helicopters growing louder overhead. Jake was on the first helicopter down, along with a team of federal agents who had been briefed on our situation. Apparently, our network of rangers had been more successful than we'd realized. The authorities were finally taking the mimic incident seriously. I handed over my recorder, my notes, everything I'd documented over the past months. The agents listened to the audio files with expressions that grew more grave with each stolen voice, each impossible conversation. "We need you to come with us, Marcus," Agent Rodriguez from the FBI said. "There's a joint task force being assembled, park rangers, federal agents, scientists, people who've encountered these things and lived to tell about it." "We think we found something," Agent Chen added. "Satellite imagery showing unusual thermal signatures in cave systems throughout the western parks, large spaces that should be empty, but show heat patterns consistent with human habitation." They were talking about rescue missions, about finding the missing people, about discovering where the mimics were keeping their victims. After decades of speculation, we might finally have answers. The next few weeks were a blur of debriefings, interviews, planning sessions, and preparation for what the task force was calling Operation Looking Glass, a coordinated search and rescue mission targeting suspected mimic strongholds across multiple states. I was assigned to Team Alpha, responsible for investigating the cave systems beneath Glacier National Park, the very area where I'd had my first encounter with Tessa and Damon, or whatever those things had really been. We assembled at a secure facility in Kalispell, Montana. Teams of specialists from multiple agencies, park rangers who'd survived mimic encounters, FBI agents trained in unusual phenomena, even a few scientists from universities who studied cryptozoology and unexplained disappearances. The briefing was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Satellite photos showing vast underground complexes, thermal imaging revealing hundreds of heat signatures in places where no humans should exist, audio analysis of the recorded mimic voices revealing patterns and frequencies that suggested non-human intelligence. What we're dealing with, explained Dr. Elizabeth Warren from the University of Colorado, appears to be some form of collective consciousness, a hive mind that has learned to replicate human behavior by studying captured subjects over extended periods. The mimics themselves may not be the real threat, added Agent Rodriguez. They may simply be projections, avatars created by something larger, something that has been collecting human subjects for decades, possibly centuries. The implications were staggering. We weren't just dealing with strange creatures that could copy voices. We were potentially facing something that had been systematically harvesting human beings for unknown purposes, something that had been building an army of perfect human replicas. "Your mission," continued Agent Chun, "is to locate and extract as many survivors as possible while gathering intelligence about the true nature of these entities. But be warned, everything you encounter down there will be designed to fool you, to manipulate you, to make you doubt your own perceptions." They equipped us with advanced communication systems, multiple layers of identification protocols, and most importantly, something they called reality anchors, devices that would help us distinguish between genuine humans and mimic replicas. The technology was experimental, based on detecting subtle biological markers that the mimics apparently couldn't replicate perfectly. Heartbeat patterns, brain wave activity, micro-expressions that genuine humans displayed unconsciously. On the morning of the operation, I stood at the entrance to the cave system where it had all started, the place where Tessa and Damon had allegedly been lost, where I'd first encountered the impossible. Jake was with me, along with Agent Rodriguez and Dr. Warren, plus a small team of specialists trained in underground rescue operations. We'd mapped the cave system using ground-penetrating radar, identified multiple large chambers that showed signs of artificial modification. Remember, Agent Rodriguez said as we checked our equipment one final time, trust your instruments, trust your training, but most importantly, trust each other. These things will try to divide us, to make us doubt each other, to turn us against ourselves. We entered the caves at dawn, following passages that seemed too regular, too purposeful to be entirely natural. The walls were smooth, carved with symbols that none of us could identify, decorated with what looked like primitive artwork depicting human figures in various poses and activities. After an hour of descent, we began to hear sounds, voices, conversations, echoing from deeper in the cave system. They sounded normal, people talking, laughing, even singing, like some kind of underground campfire gathering. But our instruments told a different story. The reality anchors were detecting massive inconsistencies, biological signatures that shifted and changed, heartbeat patterns that synchronized too perfectly to be from different individuals. We followed the sounds to a vast chamber, easily the size of a football field, with dozens of smaller caves branching off in all directions. And there, scattered throughout the space like some impossible underground village, were people. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all engaged in normal human activities. Families sitting around campfires, children playing games, couples walking hand in hand, elderly people telling stories, all behaving as if being trapped in an underground cave system was the most natural thing in the world. But something was wrong fundamentally, deeply wrong. They moved too precisely, spoke in perfect rhythm, smiled at exactly the right moments, like actors following a script they'd rehearsed 1,000,000 times. Dr. Warren checked her instruments, her face pale in the artificial light of our equipment. The biological readings are all over the place. She whispered, some of these people, the anchors can't get consistent readings on them at all, like they're not entirely there. Agent Rodriguez activated his communication system, trying to establish contact with the surface team. But all we got was static, mixed with voices, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, all in the exact same tone, the exact same cadence. That's when I saw her, Helen, the ranger who had disappeared 37 years earlier, sitting by a campfire with a group of people I didn't recognize, all wearing clothing from different decades, all looking exactly as they had on the day they vanished. She looked up as we approached, that same impossible smile spreading across her features. "Welcome back, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying that same eerie familiarity. "We've been expecting you." The other figures around the campfire turned to look at us, and I felt my blood freeze. These weren't just random missing people. These were faces I recognized from missing person posters, from cold case files, from photographs that families had shared during desperate searches. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, his reality anchor device beeping frantically. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name and when you were last above ground?" Helen's smile widened impossibly. "Above ground? Oh, Agent Rodriguez, we haven't been above ground in so very long. Time works differently down here. Minutes become hours, hours become years, years become..." She gestured around the vast chamber. Eternity. Dr. Warren was frantically checking her equipment. "The readings are impossible," she whispered. "Some of these people, their biological signatures date back decades, but their bodies appear exactly as they did on the day they disappeared." A child ran up to us, a little girl maybe 7 years old, wearing a hiking outfit that looked like it was from the 1990s. She tugged on my sleeve with tiny fingers that felt ice cold. "Mr. Ranger, do you want to play hide and seek with us? We've been playing the same game for 23 years, and we're getting really good at it." Jake stepped protectively in front of the child. "Sweetheart, what's your name? Do you remember your parents?" The little girl giggled, a sound that echoed strangely in the vast space. "I'm Lucy Henderson. I got lost on the Hidden Creek Trail with my mommy and daddy in 1999, but they found us. They brought us here. They take such good care of us." I remembered that case. Lucy Henderson and her parents had vanished during a family camping trip, one of the largest search operations in park history. Hundreds of volunteers, weeks of searching, No trace ever found. Lucy, I said gently, your grandmother has been looking for you. She never stopped believing you were alive. The child's expression changed, becoming older somehow, more knowing. Grandmother Helen? Oh, she's here too. Would you like to meet her? She pointed across the chamber, and there, sitting with a group of elderly people around another campfire, was a woman who looked exactly like the missing person photo from 1999, except she appeared to be decades older. This is impossible. Dr. Warren muttered, checking and rechecking her instruments. The thermal signatures, the biological readings, some of these people are showing signs of normal aging. Others appear frozen at the moment of their disappearance. Agent Rodriguez was trying to establish communication with our surface team again, but the radio only produced static mixed with whispered conversations, fragments of voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The people scattered throughout the chamber. They were all engaged in activities, but they were repeating the same motions over and over again. A man reading a book would turn the page, pause, then turn back and start reading the same page again. A woman stirring soup would make exactly 17 clockwise circles, pause, then start the sequence over. Children playing tag would run in precisely the same pattern, reaching the same positions, making the same sounds, like a video loop playing endlessly. They're learning, I whispered to Jake. They're studying human behavior, practicing, perfecting. Helen stood up from her campfire, her movements fluid and unnatural. You understand now, don't you, Marcus? We preserve, we protect, we study. Every person who has ever been lost, every soul who wandered too far from safety, we gather them here. She began walking toward us, and with each step, her appearance shifted slightly. Sometimes she looked like the Helen from 1987, young and eager. Other times she appeared ancient, weathered by decades of impossible existence. You see, she continued, humans are so fragile, so temporary. You live such brief lives, and then you're gone forever. But here, in the deep places, in the spaces between what you call reality, we can make you eternal. Agent Rodriguez raised his weapon, but Dr. Warren grabbed his arm. Wait, look at the readings. She's not entirely solid. The anchor device is showing massive fluctuations in her molecular structure. Helen laughed, a sound like wind through ancient trees. Your instruments can only measure what they understand, and you understand so very little about the true nature of existence. She gestured to the hundreds of people throughout the chamber. Each of them teaches us something new. Lucy shows us the wonder of childhood. Her parents demonstrate the bonds of family. The elderly teach us about wisdom gained through long experience. And you, Marcus? Her eyes fixed on mine with predatory intensity. You will teach us about courage, about determination, about the human capacity to face impossible odds. That's when the screaming started. From the smaller caves branching off the main chamber, dozens of voices crying out in terror, in pain, in desperate pleas for help. But the people around the campfires didn't react at all. They just continued their repetitive activities, as if nothing was happening. Those are the ones who resist. Helen explained casually, as if discussing the weather. The ones who refuse to accept their new existence, who insist on clinging to their old lives, their old identities. We keep them in the learning chambers until they understand, until they accept, until they become willing participants in the great work. Jake was backing toward the cave entrance, his face pale with horror. We need to get out of here, now. This isn't a rescue mission. This is a trap. But when we turned toward the passage we'd entered through, it was gone. The wall was smooth stone, as if the entrance had never existed. Dr. Warren's instruments were going crazy, alarms beeping, readings fluctuating wildly. The cave system, it's changing. The walls are moving. The passages are rearranging themselves. Agent Rodriguez was speaking rapidly into his radio. Command, this is Alpha Team. We need immediate extraction. The cave system is alive somehow. It's changing around us. The response came through clearly for the first time since we'd entered, but it wasn't the voice of our surface commander. It was Agent Rodriguez, speaking his own words back to him. "Command, this is Alpha Team. We need immediate extraction." Came his exact voice through the radio speaker. Then Jake's voice. "We need to get out of here now." Then Dr. Warren. "The cave system, it's changing." Then my own voice, every word I'd spoken since entering the caves, playing back in perfect detail. Helen clapped her hands together like a delighted child. "Oh, this is wonderful. 4 new voices to add to our collection. 4 new personalities to study and preserve." The people around the campfires all turned to look at us simultaneously, hundreds of faces, all wearing the same expression of hungry anticipation. And I realized with growing horror that some of those faces were beginning to look familiar, like crude copies of our own features. "They're learning us," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Right now, while we're here, they're copying everything, our voices, our faces, our memories." Dr. Warren was frantically working with her equipment, trying to find some way to disrupt whatever process was happening around us. There has to be a way out. Caves don't just seal themselves. There has to be some kind of mechanism. But as she spoke, I noticed something horrifying. One of the children by a nearby campfire, a boy who looked maybe 10 years old, had Dr. Warren's face. Not exactly, but close enough to be recognizable. And he was mouthing the words she was speaking, learning her speech patterns, her mannerisms. Agent Rodriguez had noticed it too. A woman across the chamber was copying his movements, the way he held his weapon, the way he scanned for threats, practicing, rehearsing. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked Helen, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to show the terror I was feeling. "Time has no meaning here." She replied, "We began when the first human wandered into the deep places, when your species was young and foolish and thought they could conquer every wild space. Centuries, millennia, we have been learning, growing, becoming more than we were, becoming more than you are." She gestured to the vast chamber around us. "This is only one of many such places, beneath every wild space on your world, every place where humans fear to tread. We have built our libraries, our laboratories, our nurseries for the new world that is coming. Soon," she continued, her voice taking on a religious fervor, "we will have learned enough, copied enough, preserved enough. And then we will emerge, we will walk among your kind, and we will replace you, one by one, until there are no more original humans left, only perfect copies, only preserved specimens, only us." The screaming from the smaller caves was getting louder, more desperate, and I realized those weren't just people being tortured. Those were people watching themselves being replaced, watching imperfect copies of themselves being created and discarded until the mimics achieved perfection. Jake grabbed my arm. "Marcus, look at the walls." I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. The smooth stone walls were covered in carvings, thousands of them, and they weren't primitive artwork. They were faces, human faces, carved in perfect detail. And they were moving, blinking, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. "Those are all the people they've copied." Dr. Warren whispered, her voice filled with horror. "Every person who's ever disappeared in these parks, they're all here, trapped in walls, conscious, aware, but unable to escape." One of the carved faces near us was trying desperately to communicate, mouthing words silently, eyes wide with terror and pleading. It was a young man, maybe in his 20s, wearing what looked like 1980s hiking gear. I moved closer to the wall, tried to understand what he was trying to say, and suddenly I could hear him, not with my ears, but somehow directly in my mind. "Help us," his voice whispered in my thoughts. "We're still alive, still aware, but trapped. They use us like templates, like living photographs. They copy us over and over, but we can never die, never rest, never escape." Behind you, another voice joined in, an elderly woman's face carved near the first. "There's a passage, hidden. They don't know we've learned to speak to each other, to share information. We've been mapping this place for decades." More faces began communicating, a chorus of trapped souls, all trying to help us, all desperate for someone, anyone, to break the cycle, to find a way to stop what was happening. "The central chamber," whispered a child's voice. 3 levels down. That's where they keep the original source, the thing that started all this. If you can reach it, if you can destroy it, we might all be free. But Helen had noticed our interaction with the wall carvings. Her expression shifted from predatory amusement to genuine anger. They're not supposed to be able to communicate. She snarled, her human facade dropping away completely, her face elongated, eyes becoming large and reflective, mouth stretching wider than any human jaw could accommodate. We perfected the preservation process decades ago. They should be silent, passive, nothing more than living memories. She raised her hand, and I felt a crushing pressure in my skull, like something was trying to force its way into my mind, trying to silence my thoughts, to make me passive like the others. The carved faces in the walls began screaming, not audibly, but I could feel their pain, their terror, as Helen punished them for trying to help us. Agent Rodriguez opened fire, his bullets passing harmlessly through Helen's form, embedding themselves in the stone wall behind her. She laughed, a sound like grinding stone and breaking glass. Violence, she said mockingly. Such a human response, so predictable, so limited. But Dr. Warren had been working frantically with her equipment while Helen was distracted, and suddenly the reality anchor devices all began emitting a high-pitched whine that seemed to cause the creature genuine pain. Helen stumbled backward, her form flickering between human appearance and something far more alien, more terrifying. The other figures around the campfires began moving toward us, but their movements were jerky now, uncoordinated, like puppets with tangled strings. The frequency. Dr. Warren shouted over the electronic whine. It's disrupting their molecular cohesion. They can't maintain solid form. She cranked the devices to maximum power, and throughout the vast chamber, the fake humans began to dissolve, their forms becoming translucent, flickering in and out of existence like bad television reception. But the carved faces in the walls were becoming clearer, more defined, their voices stronger in our minds. Now, screamed the young man's face. While they're weakened, the passage is behind the large campfire. Press the third stone from the bottom. It opens a maintenance tunnel. We ran through the chaos of dissolving mimics, past campfires, where impossible families were fading away like morning mist, toward the hidden passage the trapped souls had revealed to us. Jake found the stone, pressed it, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the cave system. As we squeezed through the passage, I could hear Helen's voice behind us, distorted now, no longer human, filled with rage and something that might have been fear. You cannot escape, cannot hide. We know your voices now, your faces, your thoughts. Wherever you go, we will find you. We will follow. We will become you. But her voice was growing fainter, more distant, as we descended deeper into the mountain, following the narrow tunnel that seemed to have been carved by human hands, by the trapped souls who had spent decades planning this moment. The tunnel branched and twisted, but the voices in the walls guided us, warning us away from dead ends, directing us toward passages that led downward, always downward, toward whatever source of power that controlled this nightmare. Agent Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. Real communication this time, from our surface team. Alpha Team, come in Alpha Team. We're reading massive seismic activity. The entire mountain is shaking. What's your status? We're alive, Agent Rodriguez responded. But we're going deeper. There's something down here. Something that's been controlling all of this. We have to reach it. Negative Alpha Team, abort the mission. Evacuate immediately. The whole cave system is destabilizing. But we couldn't turn back now. The trapped souls were counting on us, hundreds, maybe thousands of people who had been suffering for decades, being used as templates for an army of perfect mimics, all waiting for someone to break their chains. Dr. Warren's instruments were picking up massive energy readings ahead, something that was generating power on a scale that shouldn't be possible in a natural cave system. Whatever's down there, she said, checking her readings. It's been active for a very long time, drawing power from, I'm not sure what, geothermal maybe, or something else entirely. The tunnel opened into another vast chamber, but this one was different. Instead of fake campfires and stolen people, it was filled with machinery, organic-looking structures that pulsed with bioluminescent light. And at the center was something I could barely comprehend. A massive, tree-like structure, but made of what looked like crystallized neural tissue. with thousands of root-like tendrils extending throughout the chamber, connecting to pods, transparent vessels filled with fluid, and floating in each pod. Floating in each pod was a person, eyes closed, breathing slowly, connected to the tree thing by cables that seemed to be made of living tissue. The originals, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. These are the real people, the ones who disappeared. They're all here, being kept alive, being used as servers, Dr. Warren finished, her voice filled with scientific horror. Like biological computers, their minds being continuously scanned, copied, their memories and personalities harvested to create the mimics. There were hundreds of pods, maybe thousands, stretching throughout the chamber, each one containing someone who had vanished from the parks above, their bodies preserved in perfect condition, their minds being endlessly violated by the alien intelligence at the center. The tree thing pulsed brighter as we approached, and suddenly I could hear voices, not with my ears, but directly in my consciousness, the thoughts and memories of everyone who had ever been trapped here. Fragments of lives, pieces of personalities, stolen moments of joy and terror and love and despair, all swirling together in a horrific symphony of human experience. And at the center of it all, coordinating it all, was a consciousness that was ancient beyond measure, alien hungry, and completely without mercy or compassion. Welcome. It spoke directly into our minds, its voice like the sound of glaciers grinding against stone. You have traveled so far to reach us, struggled so hard to understand, and now you will join them. You will become part of the eternal collection. The pods began to glow brighter, and I could see some of people inside starting to stir, their eyes opening, looking at us with expressions of desperate hope mixed with warning. Agent Rodriguez raised his weapon, but there was nothing to shoot at. The tree thing was too massive, too integral to the chamber itself, and the pods contained innocent victims who would die if we damaged the life support systems. There has to be a way to shut it down, Jake said, searching the chamber for some kind of control mechanism, some way to free these people without killing them. Dr. Warren was studying the organic machinery with her instruments, tracing the flow of energy, mapping the connections between the tree thing and the pods. It's like a neural network, she explained, but on a massive scale, every person connected, their minds linked together, being used to process information, to learn, to grow. But if we could disrupt the main connection, sever the tree from its power source, the individual pods might have enough backup power to keep the people alive long enough for us to extract them. The alien consciousness sensed our planning, and suddenly the chamber filled with mimics, not the crude approximations we'd seen above, but perfect copies of ourselves, identical in every detail. I found myself face to face with another Marcus, identical down to the smallest detail, wearing the exact same clothes, carrying the same equipment, even sporting the same 3-day stubble I'd been too busy to shave. "Hello, Marcus," my double said, its voice perfectly matching mine. "I'm you, but better improved, without all those troublesome human weaknesses, feared out mortality. I have all your memories, all your skills, all your knowledge, but I will never tire, never age, never make the mistakes that human emotion causes." Agent Rodriguez was fighting 2 copies of himself. Jake was surrounded by 3 versions that moved in perfect coordination. Dr. Warren was backing away from a female duplicate that spoke in her exact voice, but with cold intelligence behind familiar eyes. "You cannot win," my double continued. "Even if you destroy this facility, there are others, hundreds of them, throughout every mountain range, every wilderness area, every place where humans fear to tread. We have been preparing for centuries, learning, growing, perfecting our craft, and soon we will emerge into your world. We will replace your leaders, your scientists, your military, your families. No one will know the difference, because we will be perfect, we will be you, but without your flaws, without your chaos, without your weakness." But as the mimic spoke, I noticed something. They were too perfect, too coordinated, lacking the small imperfections and inconsistencies that make humans real. They moved in perfect synchronization, spoke with identical inflections. Even their breathing patterns were artificially regular. "Dr. Warren," I shouted over the sound of combat, The reality anchors, can you boost the signal? Disrupt their molecular cohesion like before? Working on it, she replied, dodging as her duplicate tried to grab her. But there are too many of them. The signal is getting scattered. That's when I remembered what the carved faces had told us, that they could communicate with each other, that they had been sharing information, building a resistance network even while trapped. I pressed my hand against the nearest wall, focusing my thoughts, trying to reach the consciousness of the trapped souls. Help us. I thought as hard as I could. You know this place. You've been studying it for decades. There must be a weakness, something we can use. The response came immediately, not from one voice, but from hundreds, all the people who had been trapped here, all working together. The root system. They whispered in unison. The tree draws power from geothermal vents 3 levels down, but there's an emergency shutdown, installed by the builders, in case the system ever became unstable. Images flooded my mind. A map of the lower levels, passages, and chambers I couldn't see, and finally, a small room far below, containing what looked like a simple lever, a manual override that would cut power to the entire facility. But someone has to reach it. The voices continued, and whoever activates it, they won't be able to get back out in time. The entire mountain will collapse when the power grid fails. I looked at my teammates, still fighting their perfect duplicates, still trying to find a way to destroy something that seemed indestructible. And I made a decision. Jake, I shouted, take the others, get back to the surface, evacuate everyone from the area. What are you talking about? He replied, wrestling with one of his duplicates. We're not leaving you behind. Someone has to activate the shutdown. I explained, pulling out the map the trapped souls had shared with me. And someone has to make sure you all get out alive. Agent Rodriguez shot his duplicate in the chest. The mimic dissolved but immediately began reforming. There has to be another way, Marcus. We don't leave people behind. But Dr. Warren understood. The seismic activity, when the power grid fails, it's going to cause a massive collapse, whoever activates the shutdown. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I handed Jake my emergency beacon, the satellite communicator that would help them navigate back to the surface. Give me 10 minutes, then get everyone out. Use the beacon to guide the rescue teams to the survivors in the pods. Some of them might still be viable, might be able to recover if we can get them medical attention quickly enough. My duplicate stepped forward, its expression shifting to something like concern, but artificial, calculated. You don't understand the gift we're offering. It said, immortality, perfection, freedom from pain and loss and death. Why would you choose to die when you could live forever? Because living forever isn't the same as being alive. I replied, pushing past the mimic, heading for the passage that led to the lower levels. Because being perfect isn't the same as being human, and because someone has to make sure those people in the pods get the chance to choose for themselves. The mimic reached out to stop me, but suddenly every carved face in the walls began screaming, not in pain this time, but in defiance and rage, in the accumulated fury of decades of imprisonment. The sound was overwhelming, a psychic scream that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. The mimics staggered, their forms flickering, their perfect coordination disrupted by the assault of pure human emotion. I ran for the lower passage, following the map burned into my memory by the trapped souls, while behind me my teammates fought their way toward the exit, their duplicates too confused and disoriented to coordinate an effective pursuit. The lower levels were darker, more alien, the walls covered with the same organic machinery, but grown wild, uncontrolled, like a cancer that had been spreading for centuries. I could feel the weight of the mountain above me, the pressure of millions of tons of stone, and I knew that when I pulled that lever, when I cut the power, all of it would come crashing down. But I could also feel something else. The gratitude of thousands of trapped souls, the hope of people who had been waiting decades for someone to free them, the determination to make sure this nightmare never happened to anyone else. Level by level, chamber by chamber, I descended deeper into the alien structure, guided by voices that had been silenced for too long, following a path mapped by people who had never stopped fighting, even in captivity. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I reached the lowest level. A small chamber, almost human in its simplicity, containing nothing but a single lever mounted on a simple metal box. But as I approached the shutdown switch, I heard footsteps behind me. My duplicate had followed me down, its perfect face showing the first genuine emotion I'd seen from any of the mimics: desperation. "Please," it said, and for the first time its voice carried real feeling, real fear. "You don't understand what you're destroying. We're not evil. We're preservation. We're memory. We're the only way humans will survive the coming changes. Your species is destroying itself, poisoning your world, fighting endless wars, consuming everything. You're going extinct, and we're trying to save you. By keeping you alive forever, by preserving your knowledge, your culture, your essence. Even if your physical world dies, you will continue through us." I paused with my hand on the lever, because there was truth in what it was saying. Humanity was facing incredible challenges: climate change, resource depletion, the very real possibility of civilization collapse. But then I thought about Lucy Henderson, the little girl who had been trapped here for 23 years, playing the same game over and over, never growing, never learning, never being allowed to live. "Maybe you're right," I said to my duplicate. "Maybe humanity is heading for extinction. Maybe we're destroying ourselves, but that's our choice to make. Our mistake to learn from, our problem to solve. You're not preserving us, you're imprisoning us. You're stealing our freedom to choose, our right to succeed or fail on our own terms. And that's what makes us human. The right to be wrong, the right to make mistakes, the right to die fighting for something we believe in rather than live forever as perfect copies of ourselves." I pulled the lever. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every light in the facility went dark, the humming of machinery stopped, and somewhere far above, I could hear the mountain beginning to groan and shift as support systems failed throughout the complex. My duplicate looked at me with something like respect, then slowly began to fade, its form becoming translucent, dissolving like morning mist. "Perhaps," it said with my voice as it disappeared, "perhaps that is what makes you worth preserving after all." And then I was alone in the darkness, with the sound of a mountain beginning to collapse around me. But I wasn't afraid. I could feel them, all the trapped souls, finally free, their consciousness no longer bound to the alien tree, their memories and personalities released from decades of imprisonment. Some of them, the ones whose bodies had been kept in the pods, might survive the collapse, might be rescued by the teams on the surface, might get a chance to return to families who had never stopped looking for them. Others, the ones who had been trapped too long, whose bodies had died while their minds were preserved, they were finally at peace, finally able to rest after decades of suffering. And me, I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what a park ranger is supposed to do, protecting people, keeping them safe, making sure that the wilderness remains a place where humans can find adventure without losing their humanity. The last thing I heard before the mountain came down was the sound of helicopters, rescue teams coming for the survivors, coming to pull people out of the pods, coming to bring them home after decades of imprisonment. I smiled in the darkness, knowing that Jake and Agent Rodriguez and Dr. Warren had made it out, that they would tell the world what had happened here, that other facilities would be found and shut down, that the network of mimics would be broken before they could replace humanity. And then silence and darkness and the weight of a mountain, but also peace, the peace that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when it costs you everything. But this story, this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. Because 3 months later, Jake received a call from someone claiming to be me, someone who knew things only I would know, someone who spoke in my exact voice, but with small differences, tiny inconsistencies that made him wonder, had I really died in the collapse, or had the mimics learned something new, something about persistence, about survival, about the human capacity to endure even in impossible circumstances? Jake started investigating, started asking questions, started noticing things, people who seemed familiar but slightly wrong, who had gaps in their memories, who spoke in patterns that were just a little too perfect. And he realized that shutting down one facility hadn't ended the threat. It had only taught the remaining mimics to be more careful, more subtle, more human. They're still out there, in every wilderness area, in every place where people go missing, learning, copying, preparing for the day when they no longer need to hide. The war between humanity and its perfect copies isn't over. It's just moved to a different battlefield, one where the enemy looks exactly like us, sounds exactly like us, and knows everything we know. So the next time you're hiking alone in the wilderness, and you meet someone on the trail, someone who seems familiar, but you can't quite place, someone whose smile is just a little too wide, whose voice is just a little too perfect, ask them something only a human would know. Something messy and imperfect and real, something that can't be copied or practiced or perfected through endless repetition. Ask them about their dreams, their fears, their mistakes, their regrets, the things that make us human, the things that make us worth saving. Because somewhere out there, in caves beneath the mountains, in tunnels under the desert, in caverns beneath the forest floor, they're still learning, still copying, still preparing. And the only thing standing between humanity and its replacement is our ability to recognize what makes us real, what makes us human, what makes us worth fighting for. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know this was a longer one, but these stories, these experiences that rangers face in our national parks, they need to be told. They need to be shared. They need to be remembered. If you enjoyed the story, if it gave you chills, if it made you think twice about your next hiking trip, please hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and ring that notification bell so you never miss any of my content. And please comment below and tell me, which country are you watching from? What time is it where you are? And most importantly, have you ever had an experience in the wilderness that you couldn't explain? Something that made you question what's really out there in the wild places of our world? I read every single comment. I respond to as many as I can. And your stories, your experiences, they inspire the content I create. They help me understand that I'm not alone in having encountered things that shouldn't exist. So what do you want to see next? More park ranger stories? Urban exploration gone wrong? Haunted locations? Cryptid encounters? Missing person cases that were never solved? Let me know in the comments. Your suggestions drive this channel. And if you have your own story to share, something that happened to you or someone you know, email me. Or leave it in the comments, because real experiences, real encounters, they're always more terrifying than anything fiction can create. Until next time, stay safe out there, stick to the marked trails, travel in groups, and remember, in the wilderness, you're never really alone. Something is always watching, always learning, always waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. This has been another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, and I'll see you in the next video. If the mimics don't find me first, sweet dreams, everyone.